Failure doesn't break most people. It teaches them, but only if they're willing to listen. Only if they stop treating failure like the end and start treating it like the beginning. Because failure isn't final. It's feedback. It's information. It's your life handing you the raw material for your next breakthrough. But most people never get to that part because they stop too soon. They let shame speak louder than reflection. They let judgment cloud the lesson. They decide that failure means something about who they are instead of what they did. And so they miss the opportunity. The opportunity to learn, to grow, to sharpen, to rebuild from a deeper place. The opportunity to rise, not in spite of the fall, but because of it. Because failure isn't just an event. It's an invitation. One that only shows up for people who are brave enough to try. You don't fail because you're weak. You fail because you're human. Because you pushed. Because you reached. Because you moved forward instead of staying where it was safe. That's not failure. That's movement. And movement always carries risk. But risk is the price of growth. You can't build strength without pressure. You can't build resilience without resistance. And you can't discover what you're capable of if you're not willing to test your limits. You'll never find your edge if you're always avoiding it. So failure shows up. It interrupts your plans. It humbles your confidence. It throws you off balance. But what it also does, if you let it, is build you. If you stay in it long enough to see the mirror it's holding up, it will change your life. Because the truth is, you will fail. No matter how prepared you are, no matter how talented, how disciplined, how motivated, life will knock you down. People will misunderstand. Plans will fall apart. You will fall short. That's not the problem. The problem is what you decide to do next. Will you hide? Will you spiral? Will you start believing the lie that you're not good enough? Or will you pause? Will you reflect? Will you collect the data, rebuild your mindset, and come back stronger? Not because you avoided the fall, but because you learned how to stand up differently. You weren't built to stay down. You weren't designed to avoid failure. You were designed to learn through it, to evolve through it, to gain the kind of depth, wisdom, and perspective that only comes from falling and deciding you're still worthy of rising. So don't fear failure. Don't avoid it. Don't water down your life to protect your pride, because a life without failure is a life without risk, and a life without risk is a life without growth. And you weren't meant to stay the same. You were meant to grow. Not just when things are easy, but when they're confusing, when they hurt, when they fall apart. That's where the real work begins. That's where your future self is born. The first layer of transforming failure into growth is rewiring your definition of it. Because if you keep calling it defeat, you'll never extract the data. If you keep treating it like a reflection of who you are instead of what you're learning, you'll keep repeating the same experience. And you'll stay stuck, not because of what happened, but because of how you framed it. Failure is not personal, but most people make it that way. They internalize the fall. They attach identity to the outcome. They don't just say, "This failed." They say, "I failed." And that subtle shift in language, that tiny move from observation to identity, it creates a weight that gets heavier every time they try to move again. You don't fail because you're broken. You fail because you're growing, because you're stretching, because you're doing something unfamiliar, because you're testing new edges. You fail because you're trying. And that's something most people never do. Most people stay in the middle. They avoid the risk. They protect their image, and they never find out what they're made of. But when you're willing to fail, you get access to truth, to growth, to clarity. Because failure reveals what success hides. It shows you where the weak links are. It shows you what you need to work on. It shows you the difference between what you thought was strong and what actually is. But that insight only shows up when you stop running from the lesson, when you stop making excuses, when you stop blaming everyone else, when you stop avoiding the mirror and actually look. That's the shift. You move from judgment to observation, from shame to strategy, from I'm such a failure to this didn't work, why? From I'm not good enough to what skill, what habit, what mindset broke down. You become a scientist of your own process. You take notes, you study patterns, you run experiments, and instead of quitting, you iterate, you adjust. You come back to the drawing board with more data than you had before. That's growth. Not getting it right every time, but staying in the process long enough to get better every time. And over time, the person who's willing to reflect, to review, to learn, to correct, they start rising. Not because they never fall, but because they keep collecting wisdom on the way down. You stop asking, how can I avoid failing? And start asking, how can I get better at failing forward? How can I shorten the recovery time? How can I make the setback worth more than just pain? How can I carry what I learned into the next decision, the next strategy, the next relationship? And when you start to view it that way, failure becomes a teacher, a guide, not a source of shame, but a source of power. Because now you're not afraid of it anymore. You've removed its sting. You've flipped the script. And that shift, it doesn't just change your response to mistakes. It changes your willingness to try. You stop tiptoeing. You stop hesitating. You stop trying to play safe. You start moving faster, testing more, creating more, taking more swings. Because you're not afraid of falling. You're afraid of standing still. You're not obsessed with protecting your pride. You're focused on building your progress. And the more you build, the more resilient you become. You don't bounce back. You build forward. You come out of the failure with more than you had going in. More wisdom, more insight, more humility, more clarity. Because you took the time to ask better questions. You stopped blaming, you started building. And when you build that way, when you stop avoiding failure and start using it, you become dangerous. Not to other people, but to your old self. To the part of you that used to freeze. The part that used to quit. The part that used to stay small because it was afraid of not getting it right the first time. You don't live that way anymore because now you've made a decision to grow, to learn, to stretch, to reach, to fall forward, to build something worth falling for. And that kind of posture, it creates a different kind of person. One who doesn't need guarantees, one who doesn't fear the fall, one who knows that every time they miss, they gain something no one can take away. Failure doesn't just test your process, it tests your identity. It asks, who are you when your plans fall apart? Who are you when the results don't show up? Who are you when the applause stops and the momentum fades? And most importantly, who are you when the only person watching is you? Because failure will expose what you were really attached to. It will show you whether you were in it for validation or for vision, whether you were chasing identity or living from it, whether you were anchored in truth or floating in approval. And you won't always like what it reveals. But that's okay, Because clarity is a gift, even if it's painful. Even if it shows you that you were building for the wrong reasons. Even if it reveals that your confidence was more about control than about courage. Because once you see it, you can start shifting. You can start rooting your identity somewhere deeper. You stop being the person who needs to be right. You stop being the person who needs to look perfect. You start becoming the person who is becoming. The person who keeps showing up, keeps adjusting, keeps building. Not to impress anyone, but because it's who you've decided to be. That's when failure stops being scary, because your identity is no longer built on outcomes. It's built on alignment, on consistency, on your relationship with yourself. You know who you are, not because everything worked, but because you kept showing up when it didn't. Most people don't have that. They haven't built that inner stability. So when failure hits, they crumble. They attach the loss to their worth. They make the mistake their name. They let one bad day rewrite the whole story. Not because they had to, but because they never built a stronger foundation. But you can build it. And it starts with a decision to separate your worth from your results. To say, I am not what I achieve. I am who I choose to be in every season. The wins don't make you better, and the losses don't make you less. That doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop tying your identity to things you can't control. It means you care deeply, but you don't collapse when things don't go as planned. You feel it, but you're not owned by it. And that gives you freedom. The freedom to create, to experiment, to pivot, because you're not building for validation anymore. You're building for growth. You're building from integrity. You're building because it aligns with who you are becoming. And when failure comes, and it will, you don't spin, you don't spiral. You reflect, you breathe, you get still. You ask, what does this teach me about how I see myself? Where did I let performance override presence? Where did I sacrifice truth for image? Those questions, they sting, but they liberate you. They clear out what doesn't belong. They help you build again, this time without the ego, without the disguise, without the fear of being misunderstood. Because now you're grounded. Now you're building from identity, not for it. And when you're grounded, failure becomes just another step. It becomes part of the rhythm. It humbles you, yes, but it doesn't shake your core. It sharpens you, yes, but it doesn't make you retreat. Because you know who you are now, and no result can take that away. This is the version of you who doesn't flinch, who doesn't fake it, who doesn't break down when things get hard. This is the version who is anchored, who's trained their nervous system to handle loss without losing themselves, who's built resilience not by winning, but by rising. And the more you live that way, the more you separate what happened from who you are, the more capacity you create. You stop fearing failure. You start embracing risk. You start trying new things, saying yes to big ideas, letting go of what no longer fits. And when other people ask you, how do you keep going? How do you bounce back? How do you keep showing up after falling that hard? You won't have a fancy answer. You'll just smile because you know it was never about avoiding the fall. It was about learning how to rise. Failure doesn't just test your identity, it tests your systems. It forces you to look under the hood and ask, what broke? Not in a shameful way, but in a strategic way. Because sometimes the fall wasn't caused by weakness. It was caused by blind spots, by cracks in your foundation. And until something failed, you didn't know they were there. You see, most people keep building on default. They build habits they never questioned, routines they never designed, priorities they never intentionally chose. And when things are going well, it feels fine. But the moment things go sideways, that's when the flaws start to show. It's in the chaos that your systems are revealed, how you process emotion, how you manage time, how you respond to uncertainty, how you handle pressure. And if you're not paying attention, failure will keep happening for the same reasons, just in different clothes. But if you're willing to look, to zoom out, to pause the spiral and ask better questions, you can start upgrading everything. Not just how you feel, but how you function. Not just what you want, but how you build. Because failure is a feedback loop. It's showing you the breakdown point. It's not saying you're not good enough. It's saying this approach isn't working anymore. And if you can hear that without flinching, without collapsing, you'll evolve faster than most. Start with your habits. What behaviors led up to the breakdown? What were you doing or not doing that made the system vulnerable? Were you underprepared, overbooked, avoiding hard decisions, delaying conversations, depending on guesswork instead of structure? You take inventory, not with shame, but with strategy. What needs to change in your preparation? What needs to shift in your boundaries? What needs to be added to your calendar? What needs to be removed from your emotional space? Because the most successful people in the world, they don't just reflect on what went wrong, they rebuild better systems. They don't try harder, they design smarter. They get curious, they analyze, they adjust the structure, not just the surface. And those systems, they become your safety net. They hold you steady when motivation dips. They protect your energy when emotions run high. They make sure your recovery doesn't depend on willpower, but on clarity. You start building systems that support your vision, morning routines that ground you, recovery habits that reset you, communication patterns that reinforce alignment, boundaries that conserve your capacity. And those systems, they scale, they stack, they compound. You stop guessing, you stop winging it, you stop starting from scratch every time life hits. Because now you have something in place, something tested, something built from the wisdom that only failure could have taught you. And you stop fearing the next breakdown. Because if it comes, and it will, you know what to do. You'll study the pattern. You'll find the gap. You'll patch the leak. You'll come back stronger, not because you were invincible, but because you're aware. This is the difference between people who evolve and people who repeat. The ones who evolve, they don't just work harder after the fall. They don't just get motivated. They study, they adapt, they rebuild the blueprint. You're not just here to try again. You're here to build better. You're here to refine the way you do life, to bring awareness into your daily rhythm, to stop tolerating systems that break down under pressure. And every time you do that, every time you rewire a habit, reinforce a boundary, recalibrate your priorities, you build resilience, not just emotional resilience, functional resilience, the kind that helps you move cleaner, think sharper, breathe deeper, build stronger. This is how failure stops becoming something to fear and starts becoming something you expect, prepare for, and leverage. Not because you're negative, but because you're wise. Because you know failure is part of the rhythm. And when you're ready for it, you stop being reactive and start being responsible. So you start checking the structure. You ask, is this sustainable? Is this aligned with where I'm going? Is this the kind of system that can hold me when the next wave hits? And if the answer is no, you start building, not with shame, with strategy, with clarity, with strength. Failure has a way of isolating you. It convinces you that you're the only one, that no one else has fallen this hard, that no one else understands the weight you're carrying, that if they knew, they'd walk away, that if you tell the truth, they'll judge you. So you hold it. You carry it in silence. You smile on the outside and struggle on the inside. But isolation is where shame grows. And shame, more than failure itself, is what keeps people stuck. Not the mistake, but the meaning you attach to it. Not the fall, but the silence that followed. Not the struggle, but the story you told yourself about what it says about you. But here's what's true. Everyone falls. Everyone. The people you look up to. The ones you admire. The ones whose lives look polished. The ones who lead with confidence. They've all fallen. Some publicly, some privately, some dramatically, some quietly. But no one builds a meaningful life without bruises. What separates the ones who rise isn't perfection. It's connection. It's the willingness to stay honest, to stay open, to stay surrounded, to let someone into the mess, not for pity, not for rescue, but for reflection, for realignment, for healing. You don't heal in isolation. You heal in community. You heal when you stop pretending. When you find people who can hold space, who won't flinch when you tell the truth, who won't back away when you admit the struggle, who won't give you advice before they've given you presence. This is why your environment matters so much. Because the people around you, when chosen well, can either reinforce your shame or help you rewrite the story. They can remind you of who you are when you've forgotten. They can reflect back strength you stop seeing. But you have to let them in. You have to be honest. You have to drop the performance. You have to stop pretending you're fine. Because there's no power in pretending. It might protect your image, but it will starve your growth. The truth is, most people will love you more when you're real. When you stop trying to impress them and start letting them see you. When you stop hiding behind the mask and say, this is where I am. This is what I'm facing. This is what I'm learning. That kind of vulnerability, it's not weakness, it's strength. The kind that disarms shame, the kind that opens doors, the kind that builds trust. And once you taste that kind of connection, you stop tolerating shallow circles. You stop wasting energy trying to be liked. You don't need everyone. You need the right ones. The ones who can hear your pain without trying to fix it too fast. The ones who can sit in your silence without changing the subject. The ones who speak life, not fluff. Who call you higher, not just comfort you. And when you build that kind of circle, when you decide you're done building alone, failure loses its edge. Because you know you're not alone anymore. Because now you have mirrors, not just echoes. Because now you're building in the light. And that light, it brings healing. It brings perspective. It brings the kind of clarity you can't get on your own. Because sometimes you're too close to the pain to see the lesson. And you need someone who loves you enough to say, you're not seeing clearly, but I'm here until you do. That kind of support, it multiplies strength. It shortens the distance between breakdown and breakthrough. It reminds you that your failure doesn't define you, but it does shape you. And when shaped in the presence of people who are safe, people who are sharp, you emerge stronger. So if you've been trying to do this alone, stop. You weren't made to carry it all by yourself. And the longer you try to carry it in silence, the longer you delay the breakthrough. Start telling the truth, not to everyone, but to someone. Someone who's earned it. Someone who's built their own resilience. Someone who knows how to listen, how to reflect, how to hold space without shrinking. And if you don't have that person yet, be that person first. Create the space, build the circle, set the tone. Because you're not the only one struggling. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is go first. Failure is hard, but it doesn't have to be lonely. And when it's not lonely, it becomes something else entirely. It becomes a lesson, a catalyst, a moment in the story that no longer feels like the end, but a new kind of beginning. Failure doesn't just test your identity, your systems, or your support. It tests your vision. Because the moment something breaks, the moment something goes sideways, the moment your plan falls apart, the question becomes, do you still believe in where you're going? Or did your faith die with the strategy? Most people confuse the method with the mission. They thought the plan was the destination. And when that plan falls apart, they assume the dream died too. But the plan was just one path. The vision is still alive. The dream is still real. It's just asking to be carried differently now. And when you realize that, when you stop clinging to how it was supposed to happen and start asking how it still can, you get your power back. You stop trying to rewind. You stop arguing with the past. You get present, you get creative, you get resourceful. Failure doesn't mean it's over. It means it's time to pivot, to reevaluate, to sharpen your strategy, to make sure you're still headed towards something that matters, something that's true. Because maybe the failure wasn't a block. It was a redirect, a nudge, a wake-up call. And the more flexible you are, the faster you rise. Not because you're flippant, but because you're not fragile. Because you've anchored your belief in something deeper than one specific plan. Because your commitment runs wider than your schedule. That's the mark of a leader, of a builder, of someone who's creating something real. They don't fold just because one door closed. They ask, where's the next one? What did I learn? How does this strengthen the foundation? Vision doesn't mean you never fail. It means you don't stop when you do. It means you zoom out. You reconnect with why you started. You strip away what was superficial and double down on what's core. Because sometimes failure exposes the fluff. It shows you what didn't matter. It burns off the distractions. It strips the ego. And underneath it, if you're still clear, still committed, you've got something real. But if you let the fall kill your belief, you'll never get to see what was on the other side. You'll never find the new path. You'll never unlock the next level, because faith, real faith, gets tested in the valley, not the mountaintop. So when the fall comes, and it will, you pause, you breathe, you feel the grief, you honor the loss. But then you ask, what still matters? What was real in this? What's worth carrying forward? And you keep building. You don't wait for clarity to feel easy. You earn it through questions. You earn it through stillness. You earn it through discomfort. And then, little by little, your feet find the path again. Not the one you planned, but the one that's real now. This is where resilience is built. Not in avoidance, but in redirection. In your ability to adapt without losing focus. To shift without spiraling. To hold vision steady while letting the method evolve. And the more you live that way, the more you realize that failure doesn't take vision from you. It reveals how much of it you actually had. If it was just about performance, the fall destroys you. But if it was about purpose, the fall refines you. So you write a new plan. You ask better questions. You bring your experience to the next iteration. You move forward, not as someone who's starting over, but as someone who's moving wiser, sharper, stronger. And this time, you're not building blindly. You've got scars that taught you. You've got patterns you've outgrown. You've got systems you've upgraded. And now what you build next, it won't just stand taller. It will stand longer. Because you're no longer building on hope alone. You're building on history, on earned wisdom, on tested belief. You're building with eyes wide open. And that kind of building, it lasts, it withstands, it multiplies. So don't stop now. Don't stay down. Don't wait for perfect conditions. Don't look for the same road. Look for the next one. Reconnect with what matters. Reignite the vision and build again. You've walked through every layer of it now. Not the surface, not the highlight reel, but the real stuff. The truth behind what failure actually is. The wisdom inside it. The growth available through it. And the identity that can only be shaped when things don't go your way. Failure is not your enemy. It's your mentor. It's not a signal to stop. It's a signal to pay attention, to reevaluate, to rebuild, to rise with something you didn't have before. Because when you come out the other side of failure with insight, with self-awareness, with deeper roots, you haven't lost. You've leveled up. And you don't need to avoid the next fall. You need to stop fearing it. You need to know deeply that when it comes, it won't destroy you. It will develop you. It will refine you. It will shape you into the kind of person who doesn't just recover, but returns wiser, stronger, and more dangerous to the old version of themselves than ever before. You're not fragile. You've just been conditioned to play safe. But safety doesn't unlock potential. Failure does. So from this point forward, you stop living in fear of getting it wrong. You stop watering down your goals because of what might go sideways. You stop staying small just to avoid being seen trying. You were born to build, to lead, to expand, to evolve. And that evolution will always come with failure. Not once, often, but now you know how to face it, how to listen to it, how to ask better questions, how to separate your worth from your outcomes, how to design better systems, how to lean on stronger support, how to reconnect with the vision. You've been equipped, and the only thing left to do is use it. Not tomorrow, not when it's convenient. Now show up for your life with the full understanding that failure is not the opposite of success. It's a part of it. So when it comes, welcome it. Sit with it, study it, don't rush past it, don't numb it. Don't judge yourself for it. Use it. Let it build you. Let it humble you. Let it teach you what success never could, because what's built through failure is deeper, stronger, real. And the life you're building now, the one on the other side of disappointment, of difficulty, of detours, it's not delayed. It's being developed, and you're right on time.